Hello and welcome to the fourth broadcast of the Nerdflix podcast. Today's topic, Gremlins. Gremlins is one of my favorite films of all time. A classic 1984 movie. Some consider it a Christmas movie, some don't. I myself consider it being a Christmas movie because it does take place on Christmas Eve and does have some Christmas factors. Some people don't consider it a Christmas movie, but I think it is. Gremlins is about a man who's looking for a unique Christmas present for his son when he stumbles across this strange shop. And he wants to buy this goofy little creature called a mogwai. But the guy doesn't want to sell it to him. So the guy's grandson sells it to the dude when the granddad's not around. And he tells him 3 simple rules. Do not get him wet. Do not expose him to sunlight. And never, ever feed him after midnight. Bill and Ted was actually created in a improv group. The writers of the movie, when they were kids, they started an improv group, just a small one with some other kids, and they created a skit about 2 guys talking about history who don't know anything about history. And actually the original skit was Bill and Ted and Bob. There was a 3rd character named Bob who obviously was never in the movies, but the movie was almost Bill, Ted, and Bob's Excellent Adventure. Later on in the movie is when he breaks the most important rule, the 3rd rule. He accidentally feeds the mogwai after midnight. Gizmo, though, being the smart mogwai, does not accept the food while the others do, and they turn into gremlins. Then they wreak havoc, they destroy things, they're crazy, they're nasty, and they run amongst the town until they're finally stopped towards the end of the movie when they literally blow up a movie theater, blowing up all the gremlins, except for their leader, Stripe, who is now in the toy store, and after a scene of fighting a Stripe, Gizmo driving a Barbie car, they finally break the 2nd rule, a rule they had to break, which is basically drown Stripe in some water, and then they pull up the blinds and expose him to the morning light, and he melts in a most gruesome Raiders of the Lost Ark fashion. Gremlins is partly responsible for the creation of the PG-13 rating. At the time it was released in 1984, that was not a thing, and it's only partly responsible because another factor was Indiana Jones and the Temple of Doom, another great movie, by the way. Also, Steven Spielberg is involved, so one could say Steven Spielberg is responsible for the creation of PG-13. Gremlins is not only notable for partly being responsible for the creation of PG-13, but also Gremlins is the first movie to feature the classic Amblin Entertainment logo, which we see at the beginning of any movie involving Amblin. It's the moon from E.T., and any movie lover, Spielberg fan, knows that logo, and Gremlins was the first movie to feature that logo. Gremlins was made long before the wide availability of CGI, and all of the Gremlins in Mogwai are puppets and animatronics, and those are super expensive. it took up a huge chunk of their budget, that they were paranoid of losing props, because it is known that props get stolen from movies all the time. On my first podcast, I talked about the Spider-Man suits going missing from the Tobey Maguire Spider-Man films. And so they were so paranoid of getting their animatronics and puppets taken that every day when the actors left, security actually made them open their trunks of their cars and search them for any kind of prop they might have taken, just to make sure they weren't losing any of their precious Gremlins. Since the Gremlins puppets were so expensive, they were trying to find ways to work around not having to use puppets. So they thought in wide scene shots with mass amounts of Gremlins, they could dress monkeys up like Gremlins. Well, when they tried to dress up a monkey like a Gremlin, as a test, once they put the mask on the monkey, it went insane. It went much like a Gremlin, amuxed around the room, destroyed everything, and trashed the director's office. And that's why they never ended up using monkeys as Gremlins. Tim Burton was actually considered to direct Gremlins because of the success of his Frankenweenie short film, but at the time he hadn't directed any feature-length movies before, so they decided not to go with him. In the original idea for the Gremlins movie, Gizmo was supposed to turn into Stripe. Gizmo and Stripe were the same character. Partway through the movie, Gizmo would have eaten after midnight and become Stripe. Now, as we know, seeing the movie, Gizmo is the lovable main character, and Stripe is his polar opposite, the mean leader of the Gremlins. But in the original idea, they were the same character. You may recall the scene where Billy finds the Gremlins with Gizmo, and Gizmo's strapped to a dartboard, and the dartboard's spinning, and they're all throwing darts at him. Well, this particular scene was on this long list of terrible things the Gremlins can do to Gizmo. They had a whole list of stuff that the Gremlins would do to Gizmo that could be crazy and mean and nasty. While Howie Mandel did the voice of Gizmo, in one of the scenes towards the beginning of the movie, long before the Gremlins even show up, we hear Gizmo singing and Billy repeats the key on his keyboard. Well, that part where Gizmo sings was not the voice of Howie Mandel. It was the voice of some 13-year-old girl the director found to sing this very high-pitched song instead of the person who was actually voicing Gizmo. Almost all of Gizmo's and the Gremlins' dialogue was completely unscripted. Most of that was ad-libbed over, and it actually made it very easy to translate that movie into other languages, because it was just ad-libbing that they can just easily cut out and voice over with other ad-libbing. Balloons were actually very helpful in the special effects department of this movie, and they used them in many scenes, including the scene where Billy spills water on Gizmo by accident, and these little fluff balls pop out of Gizmo and start expanding into Mogwai. Well, balloons were actually used to make that effect, and a balloon was also used in the scene in which a gremlin blows up in a microwave. The balloon was really helpful and made a really good special effect for both of those scenes. And now comes the part in which we will discuss the Gremlins sequel. I did not like this film. Some people like it, some people didn't. It was not terrible. It wasn't the worst thing I ever saw, but it was not very good, and it was definitely not as good as the original. And though the original is one of the best movies, in my opinion, ever made, I do not think that the second one was very good at all. There was a 6-year gap between the first Gremlins movie and the second one, mostly because they just couldn't agree and come up with a good plot for it. Some people even pitched an idea for the Gremlins to go to Las Vegas. Someone even came up with the idea for the Gremlins to go to outer space. And it took them a while just to come up with a simple plot for the movie. Gremlins 2's release date was set up at a very specific time, the very specific time of the year, for one particular reason. This reason being that the year before, Warner Brothers released 1989's Batman, being the first real big movie based upon a comic book. And it made tons of money. It was insanely popular and it drew in so much money. But Gremlins was also Warner Brothers, so they were taking in all that Batman money. But Warner Brothers feared that other movies like that would show up from other production companies and start drawing in all kinds of money. So Gremlins 2 was set up at a very specific time so that it will steal from the thunder of action movies and comic book related movies coming out around that time. And it did work successfully. Other movies around that time coming out, all of their box office was successfully split up and taken from Gremlins 2. In 1998, that's when they released the Furby. And if you've ever seen a Furby, you may say that they look very similar to Gizmo from Gremlins. And Warner Brothers noticed that too. So they filed a lawsuit against Furby. And the creator of the Furby did not deny any resemblance to Gizmo. In fact, he didn't even disagree with them. He totally saw the resemblance of Gizmo in the Furbies. So they settled on an agreement, and they changed the Furby slightly, and apparently the slight change they made to the Furby was enough for Warner Brothers to not sue them for taking Gizmo. There's been a lot of rumors going around talking about a possible Gremlins 3. And that would be super awesome if they could come out with another Gremlins. I just hope it will be a good movie and that it's just as good as the first one. That is all for today. If you like this video, please hit the like button down below. And I will see you next week on Nerdflix.